Morality has been debated for thousands of years, yet no one seems to agree on what is ultimately right or wrong. Some say morality is subjective, shaped by culture and personal values. Others insist that it is objective, a set of unchanging truths that apply to everyone. But no matter how many philosophical theories exist, people still argue endlessly over ethics. What if there was a single rule, a fundamental principle that could resolve every moral debate with complete clarity? That's exactly what we're going to uncover today. This rule is not based on opinions, traditions, or emotions. It operates like a law of logic, cutting through contradictions and exposing the most consistent path forward. If understood and applied correctly, it eliminates confusion, settles disputes, and provides a framework for making the right choice in any situation. Why do moral debates exist in the first place? At the core of every moral conflict is a contradiction. One person's belief clashes with another's, or a principle leads to an outcome that undermines itself. For example, if someone says all people should have complete freedom to do whatever they want, this sounds appealing at first. But if we apply it universally, it collapses. If everyone has the freedom to do anything, that includes harming others, which contradicts the very idea of freedom. This means the principle, when taken to its logical conclusion, destroys itself. The same happens with many moral arguments. If a principle leads to chaos, injustice, or contradiction when applied consistently, then it cannot be the ultimate moral rule. The key to resolving moral debates is identifying which principles hold up under logical scrutiny and which collapse under pressure. The rule that survives this test is the one that produces the least contradiction when applied universally.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let's put this to the test. Take the debate on honesty. Should we always tell the truth, no matter what? Or are there times when lying is acceptable? A strict moral absolutist might say lying is always wrong. But if telling the truth leads to harm, then this principle contradicts the goal of morality itself, which is to guide us toward choices that avoid unnecessary suffering. On the other hand, if lying is always acceptable when convenient, then trust becomes meaningless and society collapses into deception. The least contradictory position is conditional honesty. Telling the truth should be the default, but exceptions are justified when absolute honesty leads to outcomes that contradict morality's broader purpose. This principle holds up because it minimizes contradiction while preserving the core value behind honesty. The same logic applies to justice. Some argue that strict punishment is necessary for justice, an eye for an eye. Others claim that forgiveness and rehabilitation are more ethical. But justice based entirely on punishment creates contradictions. If harming others is wrong, then harming criminals also becomes wrong. On the other hand, pure forgiveness contradicts itself because it allows harm to continue without consequences. The least contradictory solution: a justice system that balances accountability with the possibility of redemption. This ensures that wrongdoing is addressed while preserving the moral principle that people can change. Now, let's push this even further. What about the morality of power? Should the strongest rule over the weak? Some argue that power itself justifies dominance. Those who succeed deserve to control others. But this idea collapses because it contradicts its own justification. If power alone determines moral authority, then morality is reduced to might makes right, which means any system of ethics is arbitrary. If morality is arbitrary, then the claim that power justifies rule is also arbitrary. It defeats itself. The least contradictory principle: Power should be used to uphold moral consistency, not to impose arbitrary control. This is why governments, laws, and ethical systems must be based on principles that minimize contradiction, rather than on the whims of those in power. Now, here's something to think about. What moral belief do you currently hold that, if applied universally, would create contradictions? Every person has moral intuitions, but not all of them hold up under scrutiny. Some values feel right emotionally, but break down logically. If a moral principle leads to contradictions when applied consistently, then it needs to be refined or replaced. This is why moral progress happens over time. Societies recognize contradictions in their ethical frameworks and adjust them to be more coherent. But if morality follows logic, then does that mean there is a final, absolute moral truth? Or is morality ultimately an evolving system with no fixed endpoint? This is where things get even more interesting. Because if morality can be refined through logic, then in theory, there must be a version of morality that is perfectly consistent, one that eliminates all contradictions and applies universally. But has humanity reached it yet? Or are we still refining our ethical systems towards something greater? If morality can be refined through logic, then the question is whether there is an endpoint, a final version of morality that is free from contradictions. If such a system exists, then every moral debate has a right answer, even if people haven't figured it out yet. But if morality is always evolving, then it means ethical truth is not something we discover, but something we construct over time. Either way, this changes how we think about right and wrong. Imagine a future where moral decisions are not based on emotions or traditions, but on a precise ethical system that produces the most consistent outcomes. If morality is like math, then there should be a formula that always leads to the correct moral choice, just like how equations in physics predict the movement of planets. But if morality is more like language, then it's something humans shape and redefine as society changes. The question is, which one is it? One way to test this is to look at history. Over time, ethical systems have changed. Slavery was once seen as normal, but now it's considered one of the greatest moral evils. Public executions used to be entertainment, but now they're viewed as barbaric. What changed? Human nature didn't suddenly evolve. What changed was our ability to recognize contradictions in our ethical reasoning. Slavery was justified under the idea that some people were naturally superior to others. But this belief contradicts itself. If superiority justifies control, then anyone stronger, smarter, or more powerful could enslave others, creating a system where no one is truly safe. Recognizing this contradiction led to the moral shift that made slavery unacceptable. This pattern repeats in every major moral shift. Societies that once believed women should not have rights justified it by saying men were naturally dominant. But this belief creates contradictions. If intelligence and ability determine rights, then plenty of women would qualify, making the rule inconsistent. The same logic applies to discrimination, injustice, and oppression of all kinds. The most unethical systems in history collapsed because they were built on contradictions that could not sustain themselves in the long run. If every major moral shift in history has been driven by the elimination of contradictions, then morality is moving towards something. It suggests that ethics is not random or purely cultural. It follows a logical progression. This means there must be a version of morality that, if fully realized, would eliminate all contradictions. But here's where things get complicated. Some argue that no system can be completely contradiction-free because human desires, emotions, and survival instincts will always create conflicts. Others believe that a perfect moral system is possible, but requires a level of reasoning that humanity hasn't fully developed yet. So let's push this further. If there is a final version of morality, what would it look like? It would have to meet several conditions. First, it would need to apply universally, meaning it must work for all people, regardless of culture, time period, or personal beliefs. Second, it would have to be internally consistent, meaning it cannot contradict itself when applied to different situations. Third, it must be externally sustainable, meaning it should lead to a stable society rather than chaos and suffering. These three conditions eliminate many flawed moral systems. A morality based purely on personal freedom fails because unlimited freedom leads to conflicts between individuals. A morality based purely on collective well-being fails if it justifies harming individuals for the greater good. A morality based purely on tradition fails because traditions change and many past traditions have been objectively harmful. If a final moral system exists, it would likely be structured around a balance between individual rights and collective well-being, ensuring that neither one is sacrificed completely for the other. It would prioritize minimizing harm while maximizing consistency. It would recognize that morality is not about rigid rules but about principles that hold up under logical scrutiny. If this system were discovered and universally accepted, moral debates would no longer be about opinions or perspectives, they would be about correctly applying the system, just like how math problems have right and wrong answers. But here's where things take a strange turn. If morality follows logic, then does that mean morality is objective, existing as a fundamental part of the universe? Or is it simply a human-created system that only exists because we need it to function as a society? If an advanced alien civilization existed, would they have the same morality as us, or would their moral code be entirely different? If morality is objective, then it must exist independent of human thought, like mathematical truths. But if morality is subjective, then even the most logical ethical system is still just a human invention, no more real than the rules of a game we all agree to play. This leads to an even bigger question. If morality is just a human construct, does that mean nothing is truly right or wrong? If the universe itself has no moral laws, then ethics is just something we made up to survive. But if morality is an inherent part of reality, then it means moral truth exists whether we recognize it or not. This is the ultimate question of ethics. Are we discovering morality, or are we inventing it? And if there is an absolute moral truth, how do we prove it? If morality is moving toward a final form, then we are not just debating opinions, we are gradually uncovering a truth that exists beyond us. But if morality is purely human-made, then every ethical system is just a temporary solution, and what we see as moral progress is really just society shifting its opinions over time. Which one is it? And if there is a final moral truth, what happens when we find it? That's the last question we need to answer. If morality is real but beyond human reasoning, then no ethical system we create will ever be truly correct. Every moral framework would be a flawed approximation of something greater, something we can sense, but never fully grasp. That would mean all moral debates are just attempts to inch closer to a truth we cannot reach. But if morality is nothing more than a human construct, then every ethical system is equally valid or equally meaningless. That would mean the only reason to act morally is because we choose to, not because there is any ultimate reason behind it. Either way, The implications are unsettling. If morality is absolute but unknowable, we are always at risk of being wrong without realizing it. If morality is an illusion, then good and evil do not exist beyond human agreement, and everything we call right or wrong is just a preference. But here's where things take a strange turn. If morality is an illusion, then why does it feel so real? Why do people across all cultures instinctively recognize concepts like justice, fairness, and harm as meaningful? If ethics were purely a social invention, then different civilizations would have completely different definitions of right and wrong. Yet there are moral principles that appear almost everywhere. Murder is wrong, betrayal is condemned, kindness is valued. Even when societies have different moral codes, they still operate within the same moral framework, one that prioritizes reducing harm, ensuring fairness, and maintaining trust. This suggests that morality follows a structure, even if it is not absolute. One possible explanation is that morality is an emergent property of human intelligence. Just as consciousness arises from the complexity of the brain, morality could arise from the complexity of human relationships. In other words, morality does not exist as a law of the universe, but it does exist as a law of human interaction. If two people want to coexist without conflict, they must follow certain ethical rules. If an entire society wants to function, it must establish moral principles that allow cooperation. The reason morality feels real is because it is real within the context of human existence, even if it does not exist outside of it. If this is true, then morality is neither an absolute truth nor a meaningless illusion. It is a system that emerges naturally from the way humans interact. That would mean morality is not something we discover, nor something we invent, but something we refine over time. This would explain why ethical progress follows a pattern. As societies grow more complex, their moral systems become more refined, eliminating contradictions and inefficiencies. Slavery, once widely accepted, became morally unacceptable not because human nature changed, but because societies recognized that the justification for it was inconsistent with other moral principles they valued. The same applies to human rights, equality, and justice. They are not arbitrary, but they are also not fixed laws of the universe. They are evolving structures shaped by the need for stability and cooperation. But if morality is an evolving system rather than an absolute truth, then there is no final version of morality. There will never be a perfect ethical system, only systems that work better or worse, depending on the circumstances. That would mean moral debates will never truly end, because morality itself is always shifting. But it also means that moral progress is real, even if morality itself is not absolute. Societies can refine their ethical systems to be more consistent, more just, and more effective, even if no ultimate truth exists. So where does that leave us? If morality is not absolute, then we are responsible for shaping it. If morality is emergent, then it is our job to refine it. That means moral debates are not pointless, they are the mechanism through which morality improves. Every argument, every ethical dilemma, every difficult decision is part of a larger process of refining morality into something more coherent, more functional, and more just. But here's the final question: if morality is something we refine, not something we discover, then who decides what is right? If there is no absolute moral truth, then morality is ultimately determined by those with the most power, the most influence, the most control over the rules. If that is the case, then morality is not just about logic or ethics, it is about power. And if morality is about power, then the greatest moral responsibility falls not on those who follow the rules, but on those who create them. Because in the end, morality is only as just as the people who shape it.